An author and journalist was among at least a few people who stumbled upon a very strange discovery yesterday about how the Trump administration went about calculating which countries should be hit with what reciprocal tariffs.
It's so simple that it seemed improbable that they would have done it this way. I think initially my reaction was just like, no way. And then it was like, oh, yes, way, of course.
I'll show you the math trade experts say is so crude and misleading. The ones we spoke to all had the same reaction.
The way they calculated this just simply doesn't make any sense.
I'm surprised that they actually had a formula. It seemed like the tariffs were sort of random and plucked from air, and it wasn't clear what criteria one was going to use.
Now, yesterday was a big day for Trump, Liberation Day, the announcement of universal and reciprocal tariffs against almost every single country on Earth. And the key prop of the afternoon was this chart.
It's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing.
That giant board was page one of a list of new reciprocal tariffs against more than 180 countries, which is almost all of them. And you can't make it out so far away, but if I show you the original image that board was made from, you can see the second column corresponding to each country is labeled in fine print, tariffs charged to the USA. And then in even finer print, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. And every country shows a different number. So to translate, this is what the Trump administration says. It calculated for every single country what tariff they effectively put on US goods, if you factor in not just their tariffs, but also all kinds of unfair things those countries do to put America at a disadvantage.
For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating.
Except the actual math of their calculation is so rudimentary and does not directly relate at all, as advertised, to actual tariffs or currency or trade barriers. What they appear to have done was to take the US trade deficit in physical goods with each country, divided by total US imports of goods from that country, turn that into a percentage, and that's it. That's what they misleadingly call tariffs charged to the USA. And if I actually do the math for you, you'll see why this doesn't make any sense. Take China. We can find from government figures what the US trade deficit with them was last year, and that's $295.4 billion. If you divide that number by total US imports from China that same year, that's $438.9 billion. One number divided by the other, and what you get is 67.3%. And sure enough, this is the tariff the Trump White House accuses China of charging. Problem is, this number is clearly not derived at all from any tariff China charges.
The fact that we know now that it was a simple division of two numbers is perhaps a bit embarrassing to the administration.
Now, I've manually checked all 185 countries on this list. It took me about 3 hours, and every single tariff appeared to have been calculated this same way. The White House would eventually publish this explanation, where they show a more complicated looking formula, except we can break this down too. And this might be a bit much, but for transparency, let's dive right in. The effective tariff rate, that's this series of symbols and letters on the left, that's what they're trying to figure out for each country, right? And to get there, they take into account how sensitive customers are to higher prices and how likely prices are to increase, which they set at 4 and 0.25, respectively. But multiply them, and they effectively cancel each other out to equal simply 1. And we know that multiplying anything by 1 does nothing. So clean that up, and you're left with something a lot more straightforward, where X is defined as total goods exports, M is total goods imports. Subtract one from the other, that's what a trade imbalance in goods is. And if it's a deficit, that divided by total imports is basically what we said from the start.
It doesn't even attempt to measure what those tariffs are. They're not measuring other countries' tariffs. It's not measuring other countries' non-tariff measures. It's not even measuring currency manipulation. It's just taking the trade deficit as an ipso facto reflection of those things.
Now, the thing is, if you really think about it, you can kind of understand why the US government would see their math as some kind of approximation for how unfair each country is being. Because mathematically, what you're doing when you take a trade deficit divided by total imports is you're measuring what percentage of what that country sells to you goes unmatched by what you sell to them. That's what a trade deficit is. How much more they sell to you than you sell to them. But it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Just to use an analogy, they're like we as households, we as consumers, we have trade surpluses and trade deficits with different entities in the economy. Most of us run a massive trade deficit with our grocery store. Most of us have a massive trade surplus with our employer. They pay us, but we don't buy anything from them. Are these things that are problems we need to remedy? So in some sense, the underlying premise that bilateral trade imbalances are necessarily bad is just wrong.
But Trump thinks they're bad. He would prefer to be the seller making money as opposed to the buyer spending it, which he's allowed to think. But again, this claim of his that all these numbers on this list are effectively the tariff rates that countries charge the US when they're just not at all, and then to use those simplistic calculations to in turn inform the actual reciprocal tariff that, as a matter of official trade policy, the US is going to then impose on actual products from real businesses all over the world.
You're going to have a lot of people out there believing something that's not true, namely that Vietnam has a tariff rate of 90% on US exports and Cambodia has a tariff rate of 97%. So that's just bad, right? It just gives people a false view of the world.
You know, Trump wields tariffs as a serious weapon of global trade.
The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary, okay?
We've seen how even the simple threat of tariffs can erase trillions of dollars in stock market value and force companies on every side of the border into a decision-making tailspin because they don't know how to plan their supply chains in the face of such wacky numbers.
We may have short-term some little pain, and people understand that.
And Trump would say this works towards a noble and important goal, which is to restore the economic engine of American manufacturing. Except this most recent attempt to level the playing field, it isn't supported by sophisticated models or rigorous analysis. It's a shortcut, an oversimplified reduction arbitrarily divided by 2.
And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us.
The idea behind them was that Trump could use the tariffs we're imposing and say, oh, you're imposing a 90% tariff, but we're going to impose a 45% tariff, so let's negotiate your tariffs down. But when the 90% number is fake, then what do you do? Like, how do you negotiate it down? If you're Cambodia or Vietnam, how do you know how far to bring it down? And what are you even bringing down? Because the core problem isn't the trade barriers you have in place. The core problem is you're not buying enough stuff from the United States, and we're buying too much stuff, in Trump's mind, from you.
I'll show you one last thing. This list, one other thing I found curious was how so many countries have exactly 10% written here as the effective tariff rate that they charge the US. Isn't that weird? Like, all these countries charge the US the exact same 10% rate? Well, again, I checked every single one, and all of them, all 115 of them, actually buy more from the US than they sell, which gives the US a trade surplus. As in, by Trump's definition, these are the countries the US currently rips off. But Trump's answer to that is to punish them anyway, to charge their goods a 10% tariff. I don't know what logic explains that.